And yes, I mean, and they've been open with the FIA about this system throughout its development, and both the FIA and Mercedes have been quite clear about that. So it's going to be very hard to argue that, and it's going to be very hard for the FIA to lose face and withdraw this system. It has been put into the regulations, which should have been for next year, now will be for 2022, if I can remember. I'm a bit rusty at some of these years now that we've had so much time off. So the system will only be able to run on this current model of cars. As soon as we go into the big reg changes 2022, it's effectively outlawed. But already we've seen that since we first saw DAS being tested on that first day of testing, all the way back into March, which seems a lifetime ago now, we've actually found out lots more about what teams are doing with the steering. So both Ferrari and Mercedes already have effectively a hydraulic or a mechanical system that changes the toe of the car naturally anyway, which is a bit like you would have with Ackermann with conventional geometry. And the more we look at all of the other cars racing, Red Bull in particular, I noticed also Renault today are running a huge amount of Ackermann, either reverse Ackermann or conventional Ackermann, on the steering as a way of getting a very different toe curve between the straights and into corners. So there are lots of other ways of doing it. The big difference for the Mercedes DAS system is that they can choose when they want to change the toe setup of the car, which is a completely different ball game. And we saw it during free practice. Every time you saw the Mercedes straighten up, you saw the drivers pull the steering wheel back, and the toe goes out of the front tyres, and the tyres are effectively running parallel. So there's no slip angle between the tyre. And again, this even raises the question of what is the advantage of DAS? Is it an aerodynamic thing, which is obviously one of Red Bull's arguments, or is it a geometry thing that by getting rid of that slip angle on the straights, that you're not heating the tyres up? I believe it's much more the latter that Mercedes are playing with, but it's one of these things. Until someone's tested it, you never really know what the differences are. Very small changes in aero can have very big impacts, but everyone I've spoke to thinks it's about tyre management. And I think when we first sort of started to speak about DAS, one of the things that we were thinking is that it's something they would use occasionally, almost tactically, during the race when front tyre temperatures were getting too high, and they could then straighten the tyres up on the straight just to cool them down a bit. But from looking the way that the drivers have used it during free practice today, it's actually, they're using it much more as an every lap tool. So what this means is that Mercedes are actually able to set the toe setup of the car much more aggressively for the corners, knowing that they can completely remove it on the straights, which makes it quite difficult to do with just Ackermann setups and with these other complex variable steering racks that Ferrari and Mercedes will be running. So it's difficult to understand how it will be banned and quite where that advantage lays. But I think Red Bull are right in trying to get this nailed now. All I would say is if I was Red Bull, I would have actually raised my protest after qualifying, at which point Mercedes have already committed for at least one weekend, one Grand Prix in having that, and would either have to suffer the problems of having it removed or having a protest against them. But that's just a bit more Machiavellian, really. I think the weight penalty, depending on exactly how they're doing this, is probably quite minimal, because there's a couple of ways they could do this. They can do it by having, when you have the rack and pinion steering at the front, one of the ways you can do this is to have one rack and one pinion for each wheel. So as you pull the steering wheel out, it changes the phasing of the two pinions on the rack and pinion and changes the toe. Really, apart from a few extra bearings and a bit more space to do all of this stuff, there's not much extra weight actually in that system. As I say, we already know that Mercedes and Ferrari have been running quite complex front steering racks. Oh, sorry, steering racks, there's only one at the front anyway. And we're not sure if these are purely hydraulic or a mechanical system that changes the rack length with steering angle. But again, it's potential that DAS could have a hydraulic system on it, which again doesn't add a lot of weight. But with F1 cars, you have got quite a bit of weight still to play around with. They still do run a lot of ballast, particularly at the front of the car, which obviously it's quite difficult to get weight over the front. So a heavier steering rack system wouldn't be the big problem that you would perhaps anticipate in a more conventional racing car, because extra weight up the front is working for the teams anyway with these tyres.